There is a meeting happening right now, in an office you could walk into, where 11 people are quietly in agreement about a 12th. He is the problem. Everyone knows it, without anyone having to say it. When his name comes up, the eyes drift sideways. The small knowing looks pass between people who would never admit to passing them, and a low collective sigh moves through the room like weather. He is why the project is behind. He is why morale is low. He is the reason the good days are not better. And the strange thing, the thing nobody in that room has ever once stopped to examine, is how unified they all feel about it, how warm and easy the bond is between everyone who is not him. They are not a happy team, but they are a team, and the glue holding them together is a single name they have all agreed to roll their eyes at. You have been in that room. You may have been one of the 11. You have almost certainly, at some point in your life, been the 12th. And no one has ever asked the only question that matters, which is what, exactly, is that one person being made to carry for everyone else? Carl Jung spent his life mapping the dark material we refuse to own in ourselves, and late in his thinking he turned that map outward, onto groups, onto crowds, onto nations, and what he found there is one of the most uncomfortable truths he ever recorded. He understood that the same machinery by which a single person disowns the parts of himself he cannot accept does not stop at the edge of the individual. It scales. A group does it too. A family, a team, a town, a country. All of them have a shadow, a collected pile of everything the group cannot admit about itself. And they have found, since the beginning of human time, one reliable way to feel clean. They load all of it onto one person. They appoint a carrier, and then they punish the carrier for the very darkness they handed him. By the end of this, you will understand why nearly every group you have ever belonged to had its one designated problem, why that person almost never deserved the weight they carried, and why removing them never fixes anything because the group simply elects someone new before the chair is even cold. You will learn to recognize the machinery from the inside, in real time, in your own workplace and your own family, and you will see how the comfortable unity of any righteous crowd is always purchased with someone's blood. But there is a part of this Jung would have you sit with that is harder than recognizing the machine, harder than feeling sorry for the scapegoat. And it is this. The reason this mechanism is so nearly impossible to stop is that it works. It genuinely makes the group feel better. And you have used it, more than once, to feel like one of the good ones. If this is already turning a face over in your mind, a person from some group in your past or your present who everyone agreed was the problem, I want you to do one thing before we go further. In the comments, do not name them. Just write the word that group used for that person. Difficult, toxic, negative, lazy. Whatever the label was, write it down, because we are going to take that single word apart and find out what was actually inside it. And by the time we are done, it is going to look very different than it does to you right now. If this is touching something, a room you sat in, a role you were handed, leave a like so it reaches the next person carrying a weight that was never theirs. And send it to someone who has either been the one blamed or been part of the crowd that did the blaming, because that is, in the end, all of us. Let me tell you about a manager. Call her Maya. She was in her late 30s, brought in from the outside to take over a team of about a dozen people in a company that did unglamorous, important work, the kind of place where nobody is famous and everybody has been there a while. She arrived the way new managers always arrive, with a notebook and a determination to understand before she changed anything, And within her first week, she had learned the single most important fact about her new team, except that nobody told it to her directly. They taught it to her sideways, the way groups teach you their real rules. The problem was Daniel. She learned it in the looks first. She would mention something that needed doing, and someone would say, well, if Daniel actually pulls his weight this time, and the table would exhale together, a shared little laugh of resignation that she did not yet understand but instinctively wanted to belong to. She learned it in the way people lowered their voices and leaned in. She was given to understand the reason for everything. He was negative. He dragged meetings down. He had been there 11 years and acted like he owned the place. He pushed back on every new idea. If you wanted something done right, you routed around him. The deadline that slipped last quarter, that was a Daniel situation. The client who left, well, you can guess who had been on that account. By the end of her first week, Maya had a clear and unanimous picture, assembled from a dozen separate sources who had never coordinated but agreed perfectly, of the one bad apple in an otherwise good barrel. And she felt, settling into her new chair, the comfortable warmth of having been let in on the secret. She was already one of them. She knew who the problem was. And here is the detail Maya only noticed later, when she replayed that first week. She had never met Daniel when she formed her opinion of him. She had a complete, vivid, emotionally charged conviction about a man she had not exchanged 10 words with, assembled entirely from the inherited certainty of 11 other people. That is how fast it works. That is how little it needs. The group does not require you to gather evidence. It hands you a verdict pre-formed, and the verdict comes wrapped in belonging, and you accept it the way you accept the temperature of a room you walk into, without ever deciding to. This is where Jung hands us the first piece of the map, and it is a piece almost no one in that office could have named. He understood that what binds a group together is very often not what its members love, but what they have agreed to hate. A shared enemy is the cheapest and strongest glue a collective ever finds. You do not have to like each other. You do not have to resolve any of your real differences. You do not even have to be a functional team, as long as there is one figure outside the warmth onto whom everyone can point. The agreement about Daniel was not really about Daniel at all. It was the membrane that made the group a group. To be one of us was, precisely, to understand that he was the problem. And a new arrival is initiated not by being told the rules, but by being handed the scapegoat, because the moment you join the eye roll, you have joined the tribe. There is a name for what had happened to Maya in that first week, and it is one of the strangest and most important things Jung ever described. He observed that when a person enters a group, something in their individual consciousness goes quiet. The sharp edges of their own judgment soften and dissolve into the mood of the collective, until they are no longer fully a separate mind, but a cell in a larger body, feeling what the body feels, believing what the body believes, with almost no friction. He borrowed an old phrase for this state of psychic merger, participation mystique, a kind of unconscious identity with the group so complete that you cannot tell where the crowd's feeling ends and your own begins. Inside that state, a person of perfectly good conscience will believe things they never reasoned their way to and do things they would be incapable of alone, because the part of them that says, wait, is that true, has gone to sleep in the warmth of belonging. The crowd does not make you evil. It makes you absent. It dissolves the very faculty that would have asked the question, and an absent person can be led anywhere. This is the engine underneath the scapegoat, the reason the eye roll spreads through a room like a contagion no one chose to catch. When 11 people have surrendered their separate judgment into one collective mood, that mood needs somewhere to discharge its discomfort, and a single human being is the perfect lightning rod. The lower the individual consciousness in a group, the higher its need for a victim, because there is no one left awake enough to say no. Maya had felt the pull herself, that warm dissolving into us against him, and she had liked it, and that was the most important data she ever gathered, because it told her the machine was not made of bad people. It was made of sleeping ones. It was made of people exactly like her. Jung gave the disowned material a name long before he scaled it up to crowds. He called it the shadow, and people hear that word and picture something evil, a hidden cruelty, a secret monster in the basement. That is not what he meant. Not for a person, and not for a group. The shadow is simply everything a thing cannot admit about itself, the whole collection of traits and failures and impulses that do not fit the image it needs to maintain. A team that needs to believe it is hardworking cannot admit its own laziness. A team that needs to believe it is positive and forward-thinking cannot admit its own fear, its own resistance, its own quiet dread of the very changes it claims to want. That material does not evaporate just because the group refuses to look at it. It has to go somewhere. And the most elegant solution the human psyche has ever devised is to find one member who can be made to hold all of it, so that everyone else gets to be clean. What I would call the designated carrier is the person onto whom a group offloads its collective shadow, so the rest can keep believing the flattering story they tell about themselves. And the carrier is almost never chosen at random. Groups have an unerring instinct for who can be loaded. They choose the one who is already a little different, a little outside, the one who has lower status or less protection, or simply the one who is honest in a room committed to a comfortable lie. They choose the person whose temperament makes them slightly easier to blame and slightly harder to defend. Daniel, it would turn out, had been chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with the crimes he was convicted of, and everything to do with what the group needed someone to be. Because here is what Maya found when she finally did the thing new managers are supposed to do and actually watched, instead of inheriting other people's verdicts. She started paying attention to what happened in meetings, not to who got blamed, but to what was actually true. And what she saw did not match the file at all. The deadline that had slipped, the famous Daniel situation, slipped because 3 other people had quietly missed their own handoffs, and the dates had been set by a director who never attended the meetings where the work was scoped. Daniel had, in fact, flagged the risk early, in writing, and been ignored. The client who left had left for reasons that traced straight up the chain to a pricing decision nobody on the team had any control over. And the meetings Daniel supposedly dragged down, she began to notice, were the meetings where Daniel asked the question everyone else was avoiding. He was the one who said out loud that the new system did not actually work the way leadership claimed it did. He was the one who pointed out that the cheerful timeline was a fantasy. He was negative, yes, in the precise sense that he kept naming the negatives everyone else had agreed to pretend were not there. This is the turn that makes the whole mechanism visible. And it is the turn almost no group ever makes, because making it costs the group its comfort. The traits the scapegoat is punished for are very often the group's own disowned shadow, reflected back. The team called Daniel negative because Daniel was carrying the team's unspeakable fear that the work was not going well. They called him resistant because he voiced the resistance every one of them privately felt and had agreed to swallow. They called him difficult because he refused to participate smoothly in the collective fiction. He was not the source of the dysfunction. He was the one person honest enough, or simply unprotected enough, to be visibly holding it. And for that crime, the group had elected him to hold all of it, forever, so that no one else would have to feel a gram of the weight. Jung put the individual version of this in a line that is easy to quote and brutal to actually accept. Everything that irritates us about others, he wrote, can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Now hear what that means when it is a whole group irritated by one person. The collective fury at the scapegoat is a collective confession, if anyone could read it. Every trait the team could not stand in Daniel was a trait the team could not stand in itself and had refused to face. The intensity of their unity against him was the exact measure of how much they needed not to look. A team at peace with its own struggles does not need a Daniel. It is only the group that cannot bear its own shadow that must find someone to nail it to. To understand how a person ends up volunteering for this role, because in a quiet way they often do, you have to go back, as you almost always do, to a room they had no power to leave. The scapegoat is frequently a person who learned, very young, that this was their job. Jung understood that we do not arrive in our groups as blank slates. We arrive already trained, carrying the deep grooves worn into us by the first group we ever belonged to, which was our family. And many families, perhaps most, run on exactly this machinery. There is the golden child, and there is the problem child. And the problem child is very often simply the one who was sensitive enough to feel the family's hidden tension and honest enough or desperate enough to act it out where everyone could see it. The family gets to locate all its trouble in that one child. Mom and dad's marriage is not the problem. The drinking is not the problem. The unspoken grief that hangs over every dinner is not the problem. The problem is him. He is the difficult one. And the child, needing to belong somewhere even at this price, accepts the role because being the family's problem is at least a place at the table. Daniel had been that child. Maya did not learn this from a personnel file. She learned it slowly, over months, in the small things he said about a household where one parent raged and the other vanished and a brother could do no wrong, and where Daniel, who noticed everything and said the things no one wanted said, had been cast before he was 10 as the kid who started things, the kid with the attitude, the reason the house was tense. He had walked into adulthood already shaped to be loadable. He carried himself like a man braced for blame, slightly defensive before anyone had accused him of anything, and that bracing, that faint permanent flinch, made him read to every new group as the one. They smelled the carrier on him. Groups always do. He was not chosen despite his history. He was chosen because of it. The childhood role had become a magnet, and team after team had found him and recognized, without a single conscious thought, the person they had been looking for to hold their darkness. This is the part that is hard to forgive. So let me reframe it before it lands wrong, because the instinct here is to make the group into villains, and that is just scapegoating the scapegoaters. The 11 people in Maya's office were not cruel. They were ordinary, decent, tired human beings doing the most natural thing a frightened group does, which is to convert a diffuse, unbearable anxiety into a single nameable cause. It feels so much better to have a problem with a face, an unsolvable, ambient sense that things are wrong, that the work is harder than it should be, that something at the top is broken and no one can fix it. That kind of formless dread is almost impossible for a group to sit with. But Daniel is solvable. If Daniel were just different, if Daniel would just leave, then everything would be fine. The scapegoat is a mercy the group performs on itself. He converts a terror they cannot face into an inconvenience they can complain about over coffee. That is why they cling to him. He is not their problem. He is their relief. And the relief is real, which is exactly why this is so hard to stop. Watch what it does for them. As long as Daniel is the reason the project is late, no one has to confront the director who sets impossible dates, a confrontation that might cost them their jobs. As long as Daniel is the negative one, no one has to admit their own fear that the new system is failing, an admission that would force them to act. As long as Daniel holds the role of the difficult employee, every other person in that office gets to be, by simple contrast, easy, reasonable, good. He is the dark backdrop against which all of them get to shine. Strip him away and they would have to see themselves without the flattering shadow behind them, and what they would see is a group of people quietly complicit in a dysfunction far larger and far more frightening than one man could ever cause. The scapegoat does not just absorb the blame. He absorbs the truth. Maya got her proof of exactly how deep this ran from a colleague who had been on the team longer than anyone, a kind woman near retirement who, over coffee one afternoon, said something that rearranged Maya's whole understanding. Before Daniel, she said, almost wistfully, "It used to be Carol." And before Carol, it was a man named Reuben who left years ago. There was always, Maya realized, listening to this gentle woman list them, a lineage, a succession. The team had carried the same role through 3 or 4 different human beings across a decade, and each time the current holder departed, certain at last that the trouble was leaving with them, the team had quietly grieved for about a season and then turned, with relief, to install the next one. The woman did not hear what she was saying. To her, it was just history, just the unremarkable fact that the team always seemed to have one difficult person. What bad luck, one after another. She could not see that the constant was not the people. The constant was the role, and the role had been waiting, vacant, for each new face to fill it. This is the thing that should chill you, and I want to give it a name so you can never unsee it. What I call the empty chair is the permanent vacancy a group keeps open for its scapegoat. The role that exists before any particular person arrives to fill it and survives long after they are gone. The chair is the real fixture. The person is just the temporary occupant. And when one occupant is finally driven out, the group does not dismantle the chair. It cannot, because the chair is load-bearing. It is holding up the whole flattering structure of the group's self-image. So the group simply scans the room, with an instinct older than language, for who can be made to sit in it next. And the terrible truth Maya now understood was that almost anyone could. Change the seating once, and you would discover, within months, that the warmth and the competence and the easy belonging you thought were your own qualities were partly just the glow of not being the one in the chair. Now Jung did not stop at the office, and neither can we, because the most chilling thing about this mechanism is how perfectly it scales. The same machine that runs in a family of 5 and a team of 12 runs, unchanged, in a town, in a movement, in a nation of millions. Jung lived through the most catastrophic demonstration of it in human history. He watched an entire modern country, sophisticated, educated, cultured, locate every one of its humiliations and fears and disowned aggressions in a single group of people and convince itself that purging them would make the nation whole again. He understood it not as an aberration, but as the collective shadow erupting at full scale. The same dynamic he saw in a single neurotic patient, now wearing the face of a state. He warned, in the years after, that the gravest danger was always the belief that the darkness was located out there, in the enemy, in the other, in them, when the only place it had ever actually lived was inside the very people pointing the finger. A nation that believes it has no shadow, he said, is the most dangerous nation of all, because it will project the entirety of that shadow onto a chosen victim and call the slaughter righteous. This is what the ancient ritual buried in the word itself was always pointing at. The original scapegoat was a literal goat. A community would gather once a year, lay its hands on the animal, and ceremonially transfer onto it the collected sins of the entire people, and then drive the goat out into the wilderness to die, carrying everyone's darkness away with it. The people went home lighter. They had not actually become better. They had not faced a single one of their failings. They had simply loaded it all onto a creature that could not argue back and sent it off to perish. And they mistook the lightness of having exported their guilt for the lightness of being forgiven. Every office Daniel, every family problem child, every demonized minority, every villain a crowd has ever needed, is that goat driven into the wilderness, still carrying the load, while the crowd walks home, telling itself it is clean. There is a detail in how these stories always end that Jung understood, and that should stop you cold, because it is the proof that the scapegoat was never really the problem. When the goat is finally driven out, when the difficult employee at last quits or is managed out, when the family's problem child finally moves away, the relief lasts only a season. The dysfunction the scapegoat was carrying does not leave with him because it was never his. It was the group's, merely stored in him. And so the group, feeling the old anxiety rise again with no one to pin it on, does the only thing it knows how to do. It elects another. Maya would see this herself, later, in a different team, where a long-blamed employee finally left to widespread quiet satisfaction. And within 2 months, almost to the day, she watched the group's gaze slide with the same little sighs and sideways looks onto someone new who until that moment had been perfectly fine. The chair is never empty for long. The role outlives every person who is forced to fill it. So Maya was standing at a fork she had not known she was approaching, and it is the same fork this whole story has been moving toward, the same one you stand at every time you join a group that has already chosen its victim. She could do the easy thing, the thing the group had hired her, in a sense, to do. She could agree that Daniel was the problem, manage him out, enjoy the gratitude of a relieved team, and be a successful new manager presiding over a group that felt better for exactly as long as it took to find the next carrier. Or she could do the thing that is almost impossible, the thing that costs the most, which is to refuse to accept the scapegoat the group was handing her, and instead make every person take back the piece of the shadow they had loaded onto him. She did not do it by announcing it. You cannot tell a group it is scapegoating and expect anything but a closing of ranks, because the whole point of the mechanism is that it must stay unconscious to work. She did it by quietly changing what the group could no longer avoid looking at. When someone said the delay was a Daniel situation, she asked, gently, with the timeline open on the screen, where exactly the handoffs had broken, and the answer was visibly not Daniel. When the meeting started to drift into the comfortable consensus, she began naming the hard thing herself, the broken system, the impossible dates, so that Daniel was no longer the only person in the room carrying the truth. She started, in 100 small ways, to make the shadow common property again, to spread the weight back across the people it actually belonged to, so that no single person had to be the dark backdrop for everyone else. Jung had a name for the alternative to projection, and it is the hardest and most adult work a person or a group can do. He called it withdrawing the projection, The act of recognizing that the darkness you have been seeing out there is a darkness you carry in here, and taking it back into yourself where it can finally be dealt with. For a person, it means admitting the trait you despise in your enemy is alive in you. For a group, it means something even harder, because it means each member individually owning the piece of the collective shadow they had been content to let one person hold. It means the team admitting it was afraid, that it had resisted, that it had been complicit, that the difficult truths Daniel kept voicing were truths they had simply lacked the courage to voice themselves. It is grueling and ungratifying, and it makes a group feel worse before it ever feels better, because the relief of the scapegoat is removed, and the actual problems, the ones with no convenient face, finally have to be faced. And so what happened to the team did not look, at first, like a victory. There was no triumphant moment. As the months passed, and Maya kept refusing to let the old machine run, the group grew in a way less comfortable. The easy unity of the shared eye roll was gone, and in its place was the harder, slower work of people beginning, reluctantly, to own their own parts. Some of them resented it. A frightened group does not thank you for taking away its scapegoat any more than a person thanks you for taking away the drink. But something underneath began to change. Real conversations started happening. The kind that had been impossible, while all the discomfort was being routed through one man. The actual problems, the director, the dates, the failing system, started getting named by more than one voice, and a few of them even started, carefully, getting fixed. The team did not become a paradise. It became something better and stranger. A group of people who had begun, each of them, to carry their own weight. There was one moment in particular that showed Maya the machine could actually be broken, and it came from the most unlikely member of the team. A younger man who had been one of Daniel's loudest critics, the quickest with the eye roll, the one who had coined half the jokes. He came to her office one afternoon looking unsettled, and what he said was the closest thing to grace Maya saw in that whole long year. He told her he had caught himself, in a meeting that morning, about to blame Daniel for something, and in the half-second before the words came out he had heard them in advance and recognized, with a jolt that made him slightly sick, that the thing he was about to pin on Daniel was a thing he had done himself the week before and gotten away with. He had been about to hand his own failure to the man whose job it was to receive failures, and he had not been able to do it. The pin would not go in. He said he did not understand why it bothered him so much, and Maya did not explain it to him, because some understandings have to arrive on their own or they do not change anything. But she knew what she was watching. She was watching a man, for the first time in his adult life, decline to use another human being as a place to put his own dark. That is what withdrawing a projection looks like from the outside. It looks like a small, private nausea, and a sentence that does not get spoken, and a piece of unwanted weight returning quietly to its actual owner. It does not feel like victory. It feels like growing up, which is almost never the same as feeling good. And Daniel did not transform into a beloved figure overnight, because 11 years of being the carrier do not lift off a man in a season. The flinch was still there. The bracing for blame had become part of how he moved through the world. But Maya watched something loosen in him over those months, watched him slowly stop being the lightning rod and start being, simply, a colleague, sometimes difficult, sometimes right, an ordinary, flawed person like everyone else in the room, which was all he had ever actually been. The day she realized it had shifted was an unremarkable one. Someone raised a hard problem in a meeting, and the old reflex flickered. The eyes started to drift toward Daniel out of pure habit, and then, for the first time, they did not land. The problem just sat there in the middle of the table, belonging to everyone, with no one appointed to carry it away. And the room had to do the uncomfortable, grown-up thing, which was to look at it together. So when you find yourself in that meeting, and you will, when you feel the warm pull of the shared eye roll and the easy comfort of knowing exactly who the problem is, this is the moment Jung would have you catch. That warmth is the bribe. The unity you feel against that one person is real, and it is purchased, and someone is paying for it, and the price is being charged to a human being who is almost certainly carrying in plain sight the very darkness everyone in the room has agreed not to see in themselves. The most dangerous crowd is always the one that feels the most righteous, because its certainty that the evil is over there, in him, in them, is exactly the proof that it has stopped looking in the only place the evil ever actually lives. Jung said that what is not made conscious comes to us as fate, and there is no clearer demonstration of it than this. The shadow a group refuses to own does not disappear. It rules that group from the dark, choosing its victims, poisoning its bonds, repeating its cruelty generation after generation, family after family, team after team, nation after nation, until someone, somewhere in the chain, finally has the courage to say, this thing we are blaming on him was always ours. The scapegoat was never as guilty as the crowd needed him to be. And the crowd was never as innocent as it felt. The mob is never as righteous as it feels, because its unity is purchased, and someone always pays the bill. The grown-up question, the only one that finally matters, is whether you will keep handing it to them, whether you will go on letting one person carry what belongs to all of you, or whether you will do the harder and lonelier thing and pick up your own share of the dark and let the chair stay empty. If this reached something in you, a face you have blamed or a weight you were made to carry, write it in the comments, not as an accusation and not as a confession, but as a line you are holding yourself to. Write, I will carry my own shadow. Because the moment enough people in any room are willing to do that, the goat can finally come in from the wilderness, and the group discovers it never needed a victim to be whole. It only needed to stop pretending it had no dark of its own. If you want to go further into how this same machinery runs inside a single person, long before it ever reaches a crowd, watch my video on the part of you that you buried to be loved, where I trace the shadow all the way down to the basement where you first locked it away. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.